Hello, 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 dear listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Pursuit of Scrappiness podcast. Whether you're building a business, running a team, or just starting out in your career, we are here to bring you scrappy and actionable insights to help you become more productive. My name is Ulf Startupwiseguys, and my co-host is Jan Zeps. Hi, sir.
Hello, everyone.
Before we start, a quick reminder, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It helps exactly as much as you know. In exchange to that, you will find more than 170 episodes of scrappy and actionable topics to become a better version of yourself in business and sometimes also in life. So there's plenty to explore. If this is your first episode, check out us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We also have a new segment now called Insights. Every Thursday, we drop a small nugget from our previous episodes where you can hear some really insightful stories and ideas and plans or things that can help you in your journey. So open that Spotify, Apple Podcasts app, click the follow button, and great news for the video lovers, we are also now on YouTube. So go check out Pursuit of Scrappiness on YouTube, see full videos, see clips, and get immersed into the world of scrappiness. About today's topic. So building great products is important and great, but if no one knows about your company, it will be hard to sell those products, raise investments, and attract talent. So having a good PR and online presence is key to get out of the dark corners of irrelevance. So today we have invited the perfect people to talk about this topic. I have first-hand experience working with them for several years, and I'm a big fan of their work. Please welcome Julija, Jegorova and Mauro Battellini from Black Unicorn PR. Hi, guys.
Hi, hello.
Hi there. Pleasure to be here.
So, for those of you who don't know, Black Unicorn PR is an agency focusing on helping tech companies reach global media and audiences. They work like an external PR department and take care of whatever help your company needs to get stuff done in PR. Their clients include such great companies and ex-guests of the show as Klaus, INZMO, Startupwiseguys, eAgronom, and many, many more. So obviously today we'll talk all things PR, so let's jump in. What are the main benefits a founder and or startup can get from investing time and money in PR? Maybe you can start with what are the usual reasons why people actually do it, and have those changed over time?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna give you a straightforward answer, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unpack it for the scrappy founder. So in a nutshell, PR can give you trust and awareness. If you look at it from a funnel or earned media point of view. If you look at PR from a broader definition, it can help you mold your identity, image, reputation, position yourself, and generate brand equity. But I understand this answer is probably a little bit generic. So let's take it to what it can do for an early stage startup or a founder of a new startup, right? So what can you do with all that stuff? I mean, it helps you do a number of things, right? Fundraise, recruit talent, acquire customers. It helps your startup be more real, right? So like you said, you might be doing amazing, interesting things, but if this reality is not reflected externally, no one's going to be able to see it. The role of PR is to reflect that reality in the best possible light. So what do founders want, right? Eventually, they want a high valuation, they want an exit or an IPO, and even beyond, change the world, populate Mars, whatever. What do founders need to get there? They need revenue, they need talent, they need funding, they need partnerships, and even press, and they need good relationships, sometimes with the authorities, to get bank licenses and so on. So startups need stuff from people, from stakeholders. And every stakeholder has a journey. And every journey of any stakeholder can be influenced. So at the beginning, you're a founder of a startup. You're doing everything. Everything is founder-led, right? You find your co-founder by yourself. You convince each other to start a startup. Maybe the first members of your team, it's really something that you persuade them by yourself. You have no brand, you have no reputation, you have no story. At some point, that's not enough. You start to grow and you need talent from abroad with different expectations. You need bigger customers, or you need a lot of customers, and you need to make that funnel less leaky, or you need to remove bottlenecks from the funnel. You might need partnerships in which you do co-branding, co-marketing, and the best partnerships are with bigger companies. And big companies, they want to take care of their brand, so they want to see who they're partnering with, right? So at some point, founders or startups will feel a more pressing need to build that brand, build that reputation, and build that story, because they are going to be increasingly important in influencing those journeys. And what you can do for each is you can create messages. You can have key messages that apply for all stakeholders, but also you can think about, your future investor. What do you want them to know about you? The talent that you're hiring, how is it working at your company? Is it a good company culture? What does leadership look like at your startup? So it's all about kicking off and influencing those journeys. And PR is a tool both for awareness and trust, and influencing those journeys. But most of all, it's something that can really kick off your storytelling. And as probably a lot of investors tell founders that are fundraising, starting storytelling, starting a narrative is extremely important, because you're not just affecting one of the stakeholders or one of these journeys, but you're able to build a better journey for all of them.
And
even the basic thing, I think, just if I imagine, what do you do when you have a new person that you need to meet, or new company that you need to meet? You research a guy by just Googling, even if it's 5 minutes before the meeting, right? And then for a company, what would show up there if you haven't put out anything, right? So you maybe you have an excellent product and your users are talking about you, but how many companies can say that? So yeah, I think the just importance of, like you said, crafting that narrative before some kind of whatever comes on top of Google takes that narrative, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's the famous kind of, if you're not on Google, you don't exist, or what are the first results that come up about you on Google? And that can really determine how the perception of your startup, of your founder is shaped. So yeah, again, imagine that you're fundraising, imagine that you're pitching a large company, and you don't exist, you don't have any track record. And you have a similar competitor with similar features, similar capabilities. Someone that really needs to, make sure that they're not taking the wrong decision when it comes to a vendor. Who are they going to go with? There's a due diligence process there.
The safer bet, yeah.
So often it's about saving your ass as well.
So some founders are naturally good at this, right? It's in their blood. But for those who are not, Like what can they do? What can they actually achieve before being able to afford an agency?
I guess I'll take this question then. I think there are a couple of things, right, that a startup founder can do no matter how good he or she is when it comes to PR. So a couple of things, right? So first and foremost, do the PR hygiene. Make sure that your website is nice and ready. Make sure that you have the press page or press center, media center, whatever you call it, where the journalists can find all the information. Make sure that it's easily written, and no matter how difficult the product is, make sure that you have your LinkedIn page up to speed, both your personal and your professional one. No matter whether you like Twitter, X or not, still a lot of journalists are there, so you can follow the journalists, see what they've been writing about, see what they're interested in. So that's kind of one thing. Just make sure that you have all the very basics ready for when the journalist starts approaching you, let's say. Second, I would say, is understanding what PR is, because quite frequently what we've seen in the past, almost 7 years, is that PR gets confused often with advertising or with some other marketing activities. So people asking us, can't we just buy an article on TechCrunch? Why would we need to hire a PR agency? Or how many products we will sell after we've been featured in the Financial Times, right? So it's important to understand what PR entails before you decide to hire either an agency or someone in-house or freelancer, because then it's going to be much easier to understand what value they bring. And of course, no matter the industry you're in, understand the relevant media, understand the journalists that are writing about your industry, that are writing about similar products to you. You can follow them, once again, on Twitter/X, on LinkedIn, just keep an eye on what's happening in the industry. And I think that's kind of the very good basics to start with. First, have this PR hygiene, then understand what PR is and what it brings. And the final one is understand what media you should be following.
Yeah, and have that good picture of yourself so that people can actually post something with you looking nicely, right? Not your old Facebook profile.
Actually, what you said,
hide all those photos in bikinis.
Yeah. What you said about this question you get, like how many units of our product will we sell, right? What are some of the most interesting and funny things that people come up with all the time? I would say, like, I would have thought of this as well, like when they come, okay, how much of this sales tomorrow this article will influence? Like, what are some other misconceptions that you guys have seen all the time?
Probably this would be the biggest one, right? So people thinking that them ending up on TechCrunch, Sifted, Financial Times, doesn't matter where, that their website will crash and everyone will want to work with them. Another one I think is related to backlinks. So it's a funny one because journalists don't necessarily need to add a backlink when writing about you. They can, but they don't have to. So it really, really depends on the editorial guidelines. And then we have questions sometimes, why this journalist didn't add the backlink? Let's get in touch with him or her and ask for it. And this is like probably one of the biggest faux pas for journalists, right? If they haven't added it, just leave it. Just let it go and be happy with that.
Yeah. Well, actually, I know case at least one or two that where it led to sales. Some kind of good PR can lead to sales, like if it's a certain product reviewed in a certain way and influences the customer in this decision making stage. So it's not that it cannot happen. It's probably just the PR about your company raising X million will not immediately result in more units sold, but.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, the raising, right? So it raises your profile and then you see that other investors might be interested. And by no means, it does not mean that, having some sort of PR activities will not result in anything ever at all. It kind of helps to, as Mauro mentioned in the beginning, to push this funnel through. We did have a B2B client in FinTech once that I think they were in TechCrunch. And then he told us that they received 1,500 leads, which is rather unusual, but that does happen. Mauro, what was your experience on this?
Yeah, I mean, and that startup is a former Pursuit of Scrappiness guest. So it's Nordigen. And their target audience was basically the same readership that reads TechCrunch. So it was kind of bang on, but that's not always the case. Usually when you're in TechCrunch, what you're getting is a validation. You're getting brand equity. You're getting the TechCrunch logo, right? In terms of sales and performance marketing, there's some hybrids that might make it confusing in terms of PR. So there's affiliate marketing, for example, which sees a lot of articles from, for example, glossy magazines include links to products where they get affiliate commissions. But that is not really earned media, right? There's also advertorials that look like articles, but are designed to be more commercial. So in general, earned media, what it does is it lends you this credibility that can really only come from a third party validating you. Don't take it from me, take it from them, right? And when journalists are those third parties, they're usually not shouting from the rooftops like, buy this product, right? They're more interested in a story. That's why the storytelling. Like, where is the startup coming from? Where are they going? Why did the founder start it? What is the founder's story? What is the life like at the company? Those kinds of things. And those are not call to actions, really. There is a big difference between B2B and B2C. In B2C PR, you're talking about products that can, let's say, touch millions of people, potentially. You can do product PR, send products for review, etc. When it comes to B2B, it's more really about affecting that journey. It's about influencing that journey. If you're a fintech and you work with big financial institutions, what you need to do is really influence those journeys and get your sales teams to initiate the journey, right? To create the awareness and to kind of hold hands with the buyer until they close. So just to summarize, PR for early stage startups, so we're talking about the scrappy founders here, really hits in the middle of the funnel. That's where it hits hard. Over time, if you sustain our activities, you can create a lot of awareness. But for a new startup, we would advise that they add to the funnel with their sales teams, inside sales usually, or performance marketing. So that's everything that you can measure and understand exactly what is your ROI on these investments in particular ads with particular images and particular messages and so on and so forth.
Just this reputation, like again, to emphasize this angle, if you've been inside like companies, how they make purchasing decisions in B2B, like whatever software to buy, that's exactly like there will be this internal person who will need to sell it and convince his colleagues and bosses to buy this, right? And if you, especially if you're a young startup, it's again like you are up against somebody who's more established. And then any kind of, mention in your reputable media obviously helps that guy to sell it in your company inside. It's like, seems like you can never measure this, but like I've seen it like many times. And of course, it's like you said, you need to combine it with other marketing, but without it, like, these guys, we found them on the internet, they only have a website and that's it. And that's always like a, bit weird, I guess.
That's why it's pretty hard to understand PR. It's mystified a lot. It's definitely not a dark art, but it's also not a science. So the SaaS example that you mentioned, you find a SaaS that does basically the same, but it's cheaper. But if you can't trust it, are you going to go with it?
No.
Or are you going to go with the more known brand?
Exactly. And honestly, in PR, that's also the thing, that there is obviously, like in any industry, a lot of companies that maybe are not that good, right? And then you've worked with some companies that are not delivering the things they promised, and maybe some people have bad experience with PR as well. That also sometimes can happen, right?
It happens, I think, slightly way too many times recently, because PR became a very broad and, I don't know, well-regarded product, I guess, right? So a lot of people are doing PR. A lot of people that don't have experience do PR simply because it seems quite easy, right? So usually whenever we're chatting with someone who has no clue about PR, they think all we do is write press releases and just blast those out to journalists, and that's about it. When in reality, it does not work like that. And I did a couple of seminars recently, and some people said like, damn, PR actually is a full-time job. I was like, well, yeah, it is. That's why we exist. But in terms of having this bad rep with PR agencies or PR freelancers, that does happen. Simply, I think because, you will have to also differentiate the way PR works, let's say in local markets versus in big international markets, right? So what works well in the local markets, let's say somewhere in Lithuania, you can't replicate the same thing and do it for the international media. And what we've been seeing is that you have a lot of, let's say, local freelancers or agencies, trying to do international PR, but the rules of the game are so different. And the journalists and the way they work is just 180 degrees difference, pretty much.
It usually comes down to education. It's a known fact that most founders come from a product background, especially in CE, for example, or from a sales and finance background. So one is usually a CTO, the other one is a CEO. But what's typically missing is a marketing brain, let's say. That's why we always encourage new founders not to do PR, because it can be quite time intensive and drain your resources when you should be fundraising, talking to customers, etc. But yes, do the minimum education so that you can think with a PR hat on, is what we like to call it. So when you do hire an agency, when you do hire your first PR team member or a freelancer, that you understand what they should be doing and what to expect from PR, most importantly.
And also a trap is there are a lot of media companies and very known brands, all of you know them, but like it's just obviously it's their business to sell those, like you said, like affiliate placements or any kind of interviews and those things. And they also very often like proactively try to sell it, right? And then, a founder can also kind of think like, wow, great opportunity, I'll pay a lot of money for that. But it's also not really the same as earned, PR. Really, at best you get them, mentioned in the logo, but which is not bad as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, it all starts with the founder. Then you hire team members, for example, head of HR that will be recruiting talent, or head of sales that will be selling, and typically, your first marketeer will look at performance marketing. At some point, all of these will find bottlenecks, and the conversion rates might not be ideal. And the conversations of the salespeople with the prospects, they might find that in the middle somewhere they lose them. So that's when you get that urge, that need. It should be felt, and that's when you start PR. There's a very famous video by Y Combinator, which talks about, they call it content and press. So they divide marketing into two. And they recommend all startups to start with content, what you can own, right? What you can produce yourself, what you can pay for to get those users, etc. And once you feel that you've gone as far as you could go without press, but it starts to become a need that can also help performance marketing, sales, etc., that's when you activate it. And typically, you find that founders get that need when they get their first serious round of investment. So it used to be seed. Increasingly, it's kind of at Series A stage because of how budgets are being guarded and how costs are being limited until later stages when startups are on more sound financial ground. But basically, at some point, they got this big round of investment. They're expected to scale faster, open up new markets, foreign markets, recruit top talent, especially for sales and marketing when it comes to CE that they need to get from other parts of Europe or the US. And it's not enough to keep doing what they're doing. And so they need to really use their entire marketing arsenal, and they need to start doing PR. And actually fundraise announcements, a lot of people go like, well, it's just money, like, it's not really that interesting. It's true. It's not about the money, but it's a really important foot in the door. It sends a signal to journalists that investors looked at your business model, looked at you as founders, and decided to make a bet on you, decided to make a bet on a horse. And journalists in the tech and startup sphere and business sphere, they like to look at these horses, these bets that investors are making, and they like to analyze them and contextualize them and connect them to what's going on in the world. So that's why typically you start hearing about startups in the press when they get 2 million, 5 million, 10 million.
And if I can just maybe add and have it on record that public relations is not only about media relations, right? We're not talking only about startups ending up in all those fancy titles that we said. It has to do with your thought leadership, with your speaking engagements, going to events, being in front of relevant people. I used to say it's the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you dress, in front of the public. So in the past, I don't know, maybe 5 to 7 years, the world of PR has changed massively. And even though media relations is at its core, and it feels a little bit like a dying breed because people say like, oh, we don't want to be in, I don't know, the Guardian printed version. But PR is just so much more than simply being in front of a journalist and simply landing those placements.
You mentioned about experiences when either companies themselves mess up or work with let's say not the best partners. Let's call it sloppy PR or poorly managed PR. Is that better than no PR, or what's your experience here?
I think we need to define what is sloppy PR. Like, it can be both, two things, right? One, does that mean that they don't have any sort of decent presence, let's say online? That can be probably somehow fixed at some point. Or are they the ones just bombarding journalists with irrelevant pitches 24/7, right? So if you don't have some of the basics, like we've mentioned, this PR hygiene, it's okay if you don't have it because you can work on that. But if you keep, bombarding journalists with relevant information, you just send them random stuff, then it's better not to do that, because in the long run that will affect you. What you want to avoid, I think, a lot of times PR is associated with hype, right? A lot of people say like, oh my goodness, we're going to be everywhere, everyone will know about us, this is so amazing. And there are a lot of examples, I think, in the startup world all across the world where hype actually backfires, because what you want to have very proper and decent, first and foremost, is have like a solid product, no matter whether it's a B2B product, a B2C product. Before you go out to the media and talk about it, you have to make sure that it's just, bulletproof, that you can actually, they can actually do it. But it does not mean that you should not be doing any sort of PR, right, by yourself without hiring someone. You should give it a go. You should definitely try it. And as I've mentioned, there are a lot of basic things that any of the founders can do to start this kind of PR journey, but also treat PR, I guess, with a little bit of respect in terms of the way it works, because also quite frequently people are asking, okay, so we're launching this new website. Can we just go and be on TechCrunch? And you try to explain this is not how it works, right? You can't just write a press release about the new website because no one cares. And all of that kind of goes back to education. So you know what makes news over time. You know what journalists write about what. So sloppy PR to a certain degree is okay. But if you have, a chance to do it well from the start.
This is a good actually point. How people overestimate what's important to them versus what's important to anyone else in the world. What is these things that journalists, apart from fundraising and else, and what are these things that journalists say like, aha, this is genuinely something I want to write about?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's what we would consider is the basics of PR education, which is to understand what is newsworthiness. What is newsworthiness generally, but then what is newsworthiness in the startup world, which can be quite different because a startup is a different beast. It's smaller, but it can produce high impact and it can be very scalable. And then the second dimension to this is what is newsworthy to a particular journalist? Because in PR, we're mostly talking about one-to-one communication with a certain third party, typically the journalist. And what might be newsworthy to one journalist might be spam to another, right? That's why journalists complain so much about emails that they get that are blasted. PR is not email marketing. It's not one-to-many. If you do one-to-many, 99% of your recipients are going to complain that you're spamming them. So it goes down to what is newsworthiness. So newsworthiness can be divided into 5 main things. So first is timeliness. And you can think of timeliness in short term and long term. So short term, if you have a news item, an announcement that is very timely, it happens that day, it kind of needs to get covered that day. If the journalist covers news in your remit, then they're going to cover it that day because it's so timely. For example, a funding announcement. For example, product launch, right? You can also think about timeliness in the longer term in terms of what are the trends, right? For example, Gen AI. You can be more timely if you touch the topics, the conversations that are being discussed in the last few months, in the last few weeks, right? So the second item in newsworthiness would be impact. And impact, it's a number of things. It has to do a lot with size. So for example, for a startup, are you pre-seed, seed, series A? A lot of journalists have kind of a cutoff, right? They want to look at startups that have a certain revenue, a certain number of employees. They're active in a certain number of markets. And when you look at your Sifted, your TechCrunch, Business Insider, you will see that they're not really looking at the super early stage startups. So, there's no need, there's no utility in targeting them at a super early stage because you're not going to get there. It's going to be a waste of resources. That's one of the reasons why founders sometimes get disillusioned in PR, but they don't understand that they're not newsworthy yet in those outlets. Thirdly, within newsworthiness, you have geography. So where are you based? If you're a startup based in the Baltics, in, for example, Lithuania, you're very likely to be in Lithuanian media, even as a very early stage startup. There's also Baltic media outlets and even CEE outlets. And you're going to be there before you can be on the top tier, right? But geography also means, are you opening an office in the US? Suddenly, you're unlocking US outlets potentially, local outlets for that city or startup outlets, right? You're expanding across all of Europe. Suddenly, that geography is also impact, right? So the bigger you are, the more opportunities you unlock or the more newsworthy you are. Finally, there's a couple of categories that are not as relevant to startups, which are celebrity. Unless you have a celebrity investor, for example, which can be a well-known VC, like a US VC, suddenly invests in a random startup, like in the Baltics, right? It will be everywhere. Or like a literal celebrity, there's a lot of football players out there, athletes, singers, etc., that are participating as angels. And you can see it a lot in Sifted, for example, sometimes, that certain celebrities, like they were an angel investor in a certain startup. And finally, there's conflict, which doesn't really apply so much to early stage startups, but you can create a narrative of conflict to become more newsworthy. Or you could have like a legal conflict, or there could be a crisis at the startup. So it's not really something you want to play with. It's kind of like playing with fire. So if you understand that, you will understand your startup's limitations, but also what you can go for.
Is conflict what kind of TransferWise used initially, going against banks and doing all those, guerrilla marketing? And would you characterize that as conflict creating in their messaging and story building?
Yeah, correct. I mean, in general, neobanks emerged out of like the failure, you could say, of traditional banking, right? And what Wise did was very smart in that they really saw an injustice, right? So these fees for payments or exchange rates, and so they identified that this is a button that if they pressed, they could get attention with it, right? I think every startup can, once they understand newsworthiness, they can do a PR SWOT of themselves, like any other SWOT, right? And understand what are their strengths, what are the opportunities, what are the threats, what are the weaknesses, and then really stress the strengths and opportunities to get an edge in terms of the storytelling and the PR. So, for example, again, we mentioned Roland, who was on the podcast, and we worked with him. We did a similar exercise, and at the time, open banking was a new thing in the tech world, but nobody really understood it that well. So in this discovery, we understood that he could break it down really well. Like, it was very clear if he explained it. And it was not the biggest open banking startup. So there were much bigger ones from the UK, much better funded and so on. But with this strength, we went to journalists and connected him, and we let him do his magic, and he became a go-to source for open banking, right? Even though maybe there were 5 bigger, more impactful open banking startups at the time.
And I guess I just also will note on this that journalists, even though they might be writing about the specific category, they do not always have the in-depth knowledge that say that the founders do, or the technical knowledge. I've been attending an event with the Financial Times journalist recently, and she did say that some of the topics are very interesting, but because they seem to be so complex and using such complex language, it's very difficult to write about them. So as Mauro mentioned, having someone being able to break down in the most simple terms really helps journalists. However, what you should not be expecting from the media is that if you had a conversation with them, if you had a call, an interview, coffee, dinner, whatever, that they will write about you. Your long-term idea is to become a source for that journalist, and then of course over time you will be mentioned, whichever place you need to be mentioned. But there's sometimes expectations that if you had a conversation with the journalist, that you're definitely going to be having this like full-blown feature, which in reality it might happen, it may not happen, or you may just have a tiny little mention. So the way journalists work is also quite unique, I think, to any sort of other marketing, advertising, content activities.
So we have mentioned several times, funding announcements as the most common PR for startups. But to get there, you need to raise first. So maybe we can finalize this by talking a bit about companies that are raising in the next 12 months, which is probably most companies. What can they do in terms of PR to increase their chances of getting that fundraise across the finish line?
Yeah, so the basics, right? Always get sorted the basics. So as I mentioned, make sure that you have a decent website presence, that you have your company background, that you have proper founder biographies. Make sure that you're vocal, let's say on LinkedIn, because it will help you in the long run with thought leadership. If there's a chance for you to participate and talk on stage at smaller events, maybe regional events, do that. If you have a chance to comment on something and journalists are looking for input from a variety of startups, even though not the ones that raise millions and millions, try to do that. And just think about everything that you do with this kind of PR/journalist hat on, because in the long run will be very important, and slowly start leaving these kind of PR and media breadcrumbs, right? Because it will really, really help. Never neglect smaller publications or local publications or trade publications, because you can't just try and, aim to the tier 1 from day 0, right? So it's important to make sure that you are featured in some publications that might be small. It does not mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean that it will, be bad for your reputation, but it will really, really help you in the long run.
Yeah, and think about the journalists as another stakeholder. They have their own journey. So again, if you knock on the door of a journalist and they open the door, what are they going to see? So before you even start doing PR, think of that journey and make it as good as possible.
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned about readiness. So whenever you go out, you have to be prepared to go under scrutiny, right? In terms of your persona, in terms of whatever you have done before or are doing now, and what your company is doing. What kind of website do you have? What kind of product do you have? What kind of reviews do you have on Product Hunt or on Trustpilot? So yeah, that's always good to do some homework also before, so that it doesn't end up that a good PR intention ends up in a questionable PR outcome.
To be honest, let's say if your product is not fully ready, be it a B2B or B2C product, if you are not fully ready, a good PR professional will tell you that you are not ready and just kind of pump the brakes, wait a little bit, come back to us, I don't know, in like 3 to 6 months. A bad PR professional will promise you that they can guarantee you any sort of, most delicious and delightful media outlets. So if you do work with someone, make sure, because your PR team or your PR person is not just your yes man or woman, right? That person has to be quite critical and objective to a certain degree in terms of what you're doing. And if you're not ready, then you're not ready, because coming back from bad PR is much more difficult than just waiting a couple of months.
Yeah, to add to that, PR is not magic. It, like we said before, it reflects reality. So you can do different things to reflect reality in the best possible way. But if you've been involved in a crisis, and your reputation is tarnished, you actually have to fix the reality as well. You cannot simply employ PR to get a good reputation doing things unethically, or not paying employees, or breaching laws and things like that.
As Ben Horowitz once wrote, "What you do is who you are." I think it's a good note on which to finalize this conversation. So, dear listeners, I think we gave you a pretty good 101 early insights, but that's probably not gonna get you over the finish line or out there. So do not hesitate to reach out to Mauro and Julija. As I said, I worked with them personally and really enjoyed the process and the outcomes. So cannot recommend more. So yeah, go out there, be prepared, have that press photo taken for yourself, and have that tidy website, and get people talking about you. So yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, guys.